Okay, so that's the first part. That's setting up WordPress. And the second part, which I'll move on to now, is actually creating our own custom theme. So there's one section of the admin interfaces that we haven't looked at yet, and that's this appearance section. If I look in here, the first section of that is themes. Okay, so you can see that there's 3 themes here that are installed by default, and they're 3 iterations of WordPress's own theme that they create as a default theme. So the one that's currently activated is this one, 2014. And you can see that it looks like that. And it's very easy to change the theme just by clicking Activate on any of these other ones. So I click Activate there, that becomes the currently active theme. And if I refresh my website now, you can see that it's changed the entire look and feel of the page whilst maintaining the content. So that's the benefit of having the content stored in the database there, separate to any of the CSS and the HTML files. Okay, is that we can use that same content and output it in any sort of look and feel that we want. Okay, and then here's a third one, which looks completely different again, but again retaining the same content. So this is what we're going to do, or what you're going to do for your assignment, is create your own theme so that you can output your content exactly how you want it to look for your portfolio. Now we can add new themes and install them from existing themes if we want, but in our case we're going to create a new theme from scratch. So I'll demonstrate how to do that now. So I'll just scroll down on my blog here for a moment. I've got another post here which again pulls out some relevant slides from my lecture about the anatomy of a WordPress theme. Okay, it talks about how a theme is made up of a bunch of template files. Okay, and each of those template files represents different things like the header, sidebar, a footer, a single page, a single post or a page, and various different other things. Okay, and then there's this nice sort of infographic I found here as well, which summarizes that sort of thing as well, which might be useful to come back and look at as a bit of a cheat sheet. Alright, and here's my post here, which is mainly just a bunch of links. Okay, these are links which I'm going to refer to as I'm demonstrating creating this theme. Now, I need some sort of starting point for this, and I've got a link down here to the files from the static website example that we did in a previous week. So I'm going to download those, and I'm going to use that as the starting point for my WordPress theme. Okay, and that's something that I recommend that you do as well, is that you actually create your page layouts in static HTML and CSS first. So mock them up with some dummy content and then use that as a basis to start creating your WordPress theme. Okay, so this is what this static website looks like. Okay, it's just a header, navigation, content, sidebar, footer. Okay, and it's got a couple of pages there. Alright, so I've got a folder with some images, some CSS, and I've got 2 HTML files. So I'm just going to copy all of these files across to my, well, first of all, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I need to know where to put the actual theme files. Now, if I look in my WordPress installation, okay, there's a subfolder called WP-content. Inside of there is a folder called themes. And you can see there's 3 folders there representing those 3 default themes that are already installed, 2014, 2013, and 2012. So the first thing I need to do is create a folder for my theme. So I'll create a directory here. Okay, and you need to give it a name. So I'm just going to call this one My First Theme. Okay, and that creates an empty folder there, and then I'm going to copy across these static website files to that theme folder. Try that again. Okay, so there's my files there. Now, because my about and my index page are so similar, I'm just going to create the template based off my index page. So I don't even need this about page. I'm just going to delete that. Okay, and I don't know why that's copied that in two places. I'll delete that logo. And okay, so that's all I really want here is my index.html file. So I'll get rid of that one too. Okay, my index.html file, my images folder, and my CSS folder here. Okay. Now, again, remembering that this stuff is all automatically uploaded and mirrored to my remote website. Okay, so remembering it won't show anything if you don't have them on your remote website. So now that I've got those there, I'm going to go back to my themes page, and when I refresh, I should notice that it at least identifies that I've got another folder in there. Okay, so it's telling me down here that it recognizes that there's something new there, but it's not working. So it says there's a broken theme. It says the following themes are installed but incomplete, okay, which is the My First Theme folder. And it tells me here that themes must have a style sheet and a template. Okay, so I'm going to refer to this link here about basic templates to explain this. Okay, and it says here at the very minimum a WordPress theme consists of two files, style.css and index.php. Okay, so I need to make sure I have those two files. So the first thing I'm going to do is rename my HTML file to index.php. Okay, and then I've got my style.css file here, but it's a particular requirement of a WordPress theme that my style.css file actually resides in my theme's root directory. So at the moment, when I developed this as a static site, okay, I had all my CSS files in a CSS subfolder. But I need to move this style.css file out into the root directory of my theme folder there. Okay, so now that sits directly alongside my index.php file. Okay, I'll just double check that those changes are made in my remote web server too. And then I'll come back and refresh this page again. Okay, and now it recognizes it as a theme. Okay, so it puts another square up here with a representation of the theme. Now, obviously it doesn't have as much information as these other ones here, okay, and we can address that. So if we look at any of these other themes and we click on theme details, you'll notice there's a bunch of information about that particular theme. Okay, when we click on the theme details for my first theme, okay, it doesn't have any of that information. So we can add that into our theme, and the way that it gets that, okay, is actually by, if I look at one of these other themes, so let's say we take that 2014 theme and we look at its style.css file, okay, there's a comment section at the top of the style.css file that has all of that information that gets displayed about the theme. So we need to put something similar in at the top of our own theme style.css file. Okay, and it uses these particular names here to represent different information. So we could do this a couple of ways. We could write it from scratch. We could copy this one and then modify it. But also I found recently this handy web tool here called the Theme CSS Header Creator, okay, which is linked from this website WP Candy. Okay, and it allows us to actually just enter in the relevant information and it will generate that CSS comment for us. Okay, so I'm going to use this, so I'll give my theme a proper name, My First Theme. The theme website, if you were offering your theme for download, okay, that would be, you'd put that in there as the website where people can go to actually download your theme. I'm not doing that, so I'm just going to leave it blank. Okay, I'll put in a description for the theme. So this is a purple black theme with header, footer, left content area, and right sidebar. A version number, so I'll put that as 1.0. The author, which is myself. You can put your own website in here if you want. Okay, all of these are optional. Okay, so you just fill out whatever you need. You can assign a particular type of license to your theme. If you don't know or care what that is, you can just leave it as the default, that's fine. And then we can tick some of these tags, so these various different colors. Okay, and the arrangement of it, so it's 2 columns with the right sidebar, it's fixed width. Okay, and you can tick other of these theme features if you want. Okay, so when we've done that, we hit this create style.css header button. Let it do its thing. Try that again. Alright, looks like this may have broken on me. Alright, looks like the website's chosen just the perfect moment to not work, but that's okay. I will just grab one that I got it to do earlier. Okay, so I'll just copy this from the one that I did from yesterday's class. Okay, so let's assume that had worked. It would generate something that looks like this. Okay, so it's just a CSS comment, alright, and it contains all of that information that I entered in there. And again, you don't have to use that tool. You can copy and paste from an existing theme or even write it out from scratch if you can remember these names or look them up in the documentation. Okay, but once that's in there and I save it, make sure it's on the remote site, I can come back to my themes page here and hit refresh again. Okay, you can see that name's there now and the theme details are here. So the last thing that we're missing is actually a picture of the theme here. So in order to get that to show, again, if we look at one of these existing themes, okay, there is in each of the theme folders a file called screenshot.png, okay, which is literally just a screenshot of the theme and what it looks like. Now, this might be difficult to get before you've actually completed the theme, so you can leave this blank until the theme's done if you want and then take a screenshot of it. But just so that we have something there to show for now, what I'll do is use a screenshot that I took of the static version of the site as a placeholder, which I've got here, so I'm just going to put that across into my theme folder here that I've got. Okay, so there it is there. Again, making sure that it's been uploaded to the remote site. Refresh the page. Alright, and there it appears there. Now I've got a nice preview of what the theme may look like. Okay, so that looks nice and complete, but really we haven't done anything yet. At this point we can activate this theme, and we're going to have to break our website a little bit before we fix it. So I'll click activate there. Okay, and then I'll come across and refresh the site. Okay, and you can see that it's loading something. It's obviously loading my index page's HTML, but it's not loading any of the styles or anything, and it's certainly not loading any of the dynamic content. So that's what we need to do now, is modify our static version of this file so that it first of all loads all of our assets correctly, and secondly starts loading some of the dynamic content. So first off, we should look at why it isn't actually loading the CSS styles. Okay, and I get a hint of that if I look in my code inspection tools here, and it tells me that it's failed to load these resources, my CSS files and my image file here. Okay, so it's repeated these errors a couple of times, but actually there's just 3 files that it's failing to load. And if I look at the URL where it's looking to load them, this might give you a clue as to why it's not working correctly. Okay, so this is attempting to load it from KIB216.if90.net/CSS/normalize.css, or for the style.css/css/style.css. Okay, but the point is, it's attempting to load it from, it's expecting a directory called CSS to be in the root of my web directory. Now obviously my theme is not at all in the root of my web directory, okay? It's in a subfolder called WP Content, and another subfolder called Themes, and then another subfolder again called My First Theme. Okay, so in order to load this, and also I've moved my style.css out of that CSS subfolder. So in order to get this to work correctly, okay, I actually need to put in a much longer URL for the theme itself. Okay, so I'll open up my index.php file here, and where my style.css file is here, okay, what I actually would need to do is type in something like, well, I don't really need to do that, but I could type in wp-content/themes/myfirsttheme/style.css. Okay, now if I save that, make sure it's uploaded to the server, come back and refresh, okay, we can see it's loading the style sheet now, okay, so that's the correct URL that I need. Okay, there it is there, okay, and I can click on that and it will load, there's my style sheet. Okay, so I could do that, and it would work, okay, but there are certain problems with hard coding the URL in like this. Okay, number one, it's a big long URL that might be difficult to remember, and it's easy to make mistakes typing it out. But another thing might be, I might decide to change the name of my theme folder, for example. Okay, and if I did that, then all of a sudden all of these links would be wrong. Okay, so what we do instead, what's better to do instead, is actually use a WordPress function which will dynamically generate the path to our style sheet for us. Okay, and that function, or those functions, I've got listed in this link here, I think, referencing files from a template. Okay, so it talks about this function called blog info that we can use, and if I look at that, okay, blog info is just a WordPress function which takes a parameter, and depending on the parameter we send it, will output different information about our WordPress site. Okay, so for example, we can output the name, the URL of the site, all sorts of different things. And one of those things that we can output is the style sheet URL. Okay, so this one here says it displays the primary CSS, usually style.css file, URL of the active theme. Okay, so what I can do is replace this entire path to my CSS file with a bit of PHP, Okay, and then calling the WordPress function blog info and passing it a string parameter. Let's just double check. Okay, Stylesheet underscore URL. Like that. So what this will do is, in its place, will actually output that full path to my style.css file. And if I then go and change the name of my theme folder or do other weird things which might change its URL, I don't need to worry about coming back and fixing up that path. It will automatically output the path to the currently active theme. So I'll save that, make sure it's uploaded. Okay, go back to my site and refresh. Okay, and it's obviously still working, so I can go in and inspect that. And again, see that there, okay, it wraps across 2 lines, is the full URL there to my style.css file. Okay, so I want to do a similar thing for any of these other resources that aren't loading correctly. So I want to do a similar thing for normalize.css, and I want to do the similar thing for the path to my logo, okay, which is obviously not showing up. So for my normalize.css file, okay, I have to use a slightly different version of this because that Stylesheet URL version of blog info knows that you want to point to a file called style.css. There's not one that knows that I want to point to a file called normalize.css. So what I have to do is build up that full path using the blog info function and then some additions to that. So if I come back to the documentation for the blog info function, okay, I can see that I can get it to at least output the template directory or the template URL, okay, which tells me it will output the URL of the active themes directory. Okay, so what I can do is come up here where there's normalize.css and replace that with, again, blog info. Okay, but in this case I'm going to output template underscore URL, and then so that will get me as far as the name of my theme folder, and then I simply just add on the rest of the path to my normalize.css file here straight after the bit of PHP. Okay, so straight after my closing PHP tag. So I'll add /CSS /normalize.css like that. Okay, and then that will build me up the entire path to that normalize.css file. So let's just test that that's worked. So I'll refresh the page, and there we go there. Okay, there's the full path to normalize.css. I can click on that, and there I can see there's my CSS file. Okay, and also it's only now giving me the one error to do with the path of my logo.png file. So in order to make my logo appear correctly, I can do a very similar thing here. I can use blog info. So I'll come down here to where my image tag is, and there's the source. Okay, so it's looking for it I want it to look for it in the images subfolder of my template directory. Okay, so I will again use the blog info function with template URL to output the first part of that, and then /images /logo.png. Okay, and then this should work correctly. Okay, so now that logo path fully resolves. Now a common issue here with doing this is you might forget this trailing slash. So it's important to know that this here outputs everything up to including the template URL but without a /. So if I don't put that extra / in immediately after it, okay, it will look like this. It will fail to load, okay, and the path there will look like this. Okay, so there's the URL up to my template directory, and then it immediately runs it together with that, with the images. Okay, so obviously I need that extra / in there. So that's a common issue that occurs with people forgetting to put that / in there. Okay, so now that's all working correctly. So that's our resources, our relatively linked resources now will load correctly. What I want to do now is start outputting some dynamic information about the site. Okay, so first of all, this site title here is wrong. It's still hard-coded in here. I want it to actually output the name of my site that I've set in WordPress's settings. Okay, and again, I'm going to use the blog info function. This time I'm going to send it a parameter name, which says it will display the site title set in settings general. Okay, so anywhere where I want the site name to be output, so inside of this heading 1, I'm going to replace that with a call to blog info, passing it the parameter name. And I'm going to do the same thing in the title attribute of my head section here. Okay, because I want it to also output the title in the tab name here. Okay, so that should do it there, and it should also do it here. So I refresh that, okay, and I can see that what I set when I set up WordPress as the title of my site now gets output. Now if I ever want to go and change the name of my site, I can go to Settings General and modify the site title here. Okay, and let's say I want to change this to Dave's Portfolio Site. Oops. Like that. Then I can go down here and hit Save Changes. That will save that information into the database. And now when I go back and refresh the page here, that blog info name function will retrieve that information from the database. Okay, and without having to change the theme, it gets set there. Okay, and also there. Okay. Let's see, what's next? Okay, so what we'll look at now is we're going to go through the process similar to when we looked at the Intro to PHP exercise, where we split off each of the component parts of the page into different template files so that they could be reused in other template files without having to rewrite the code over and over again. So we're going to do the same thing now with this one, and it's going to be a very similar process. The first thing I want to do is split off the header of this page from the index page itself. Okay, so I'm going to split off everything from the top down to the bottom of this navigation here because I want that much to appear at the top of every template that I'm going to create. So to do that, I'm going to select the corresponding code down to the bottom of this nav element here, and I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to create a new file called header.php, and I'm going to paste that code that I cut out of my index file in there. Okay, now again I have to make sure that that new file is uploaded to my web server there. If I just do that much and come back and refresh the page, okay, I can see that it's not including the header file. In order for the index template to include the header file, I need to use the function, okay, I need to write a bit of PHP and use the function get_header. Okay, so it's very similar to, if you remember when we did this just with PHP, we just did something like include header.php, something like that. Okay, so what getHeader does is essentially that exact same thing, but again it takes care of things like knowing where exactly the URL to your theme folder is and all of that sort of stuff. Okay, so that getHeader is simply just a WordPress function, and we can actually look at that function here and go down and look at another function it calls. Okay, and you can see it's trying to, if we go in here, it's requiring, which is essentially the same as including a particular file. Okay, and that particular file in this case is header.php. from your theme's template file. Okay, so that's why we need to make sure that these template files are named exactly as they need to be named, because this get header function is going to look for a file in your theme directory called exactly header.php. Okay, so that get header essentially goes and gets this header.php file's code, okay, and puts it into this current template wherever we've put that bit of PHP code. So I'll save that and refresh this page, okay, and there it's put my header code back in. Okay, now incidentally, this information again is linked off my blog here, part of the documentation for the document head. Okay, header.php, and it tells you that, or it should tell you somewhere. Okay, under the basic templates part, okay, it tells us all of the functions that we use to include the sort of sub-templates or the different template parts in another template. And as you can see, they're all functions which take the form get underscore and then essentially the name of the template that we want to include. So there's get header, get sidebar, get footer, and get search form would include a search form. So I'm just going to do these three initially for this example. So we've done the header. I want to repeat essentially the exact same thing for the footer. So I'll cut that footer code out of the index.php file, create a new file called footer.php, paste the code in there, and then back in my index.php file I'm going to call the WordPress function get underscore footer. Alright, save that. Again, make sure that both that footer.php file is uploaded to my web server and the changes to my index.php file. And I shouldn't see any obvious visual difference here, okay, except that that footer now is being loaded externally. Now when it comes to the sidebar, we have a little bit more of options with the sidebar. So I'll show you the simplest version first. So again, I'm going to select the relevant sidebar code out of my index.php file, cut that and paste it into a new file called sidebar.php, and then come back to my index file, and where I want that sidebar to appear, okay, I will use the function get underscore sidebar. Now, I suppose it's easiest to see the difference if I remove that and then put it back in. So I save that without the get sidebar. Okay, and there's just a blank space there. With the get sidebar code back in there, okay, it goes and retrieves that sidebar.php file. Now the difference between the sidebar to the header and footer is that we can actually have multiple sidebars. Okay, so you might want to have a template which has two different sidebars on the one page, or maybe you want to have different sidebars appear on different pages. So we can achieve that in WordPress by naming our sidebars a certain way. So what I'm going to do is duplicate, well, first of all, I'm going to rename this sidebar.php to sidebar dash and then give it an individual name. So let's call this sidebar dash S1. And then I'm going to copy this and make a second sidebar template file and call it sidebar dash S2. Now, I'll modify the content of sidebar 2 just so that it looks different when we include different ones. Okay. So now we have two different sidebar template files. Now I can include one or the other of these in my template by specifying as a parameter to get sidebar a name that corresponds with the part of the sidebar template name that comes after this dash here. Okay, so this factors in to that WordPress template hierarchy diagram that I showed you in the lecture. Okay, this big complicated looking one here. Okay, so this is the flow chart of how WordPress decides which template to load. Okay, and we should be able to find somewhere in here okay, actually it doesn't look like it listed in here, but it's the same concept whereby you can have sort of a general version of a template and then a more specific version of a template, which is the template name and then slash and then a name for that individual template, and if a more specific one exists, it will use that. So in this case, in order to pick one or other of these sidebars as a parameter to the getSidebar function, okay, I'm just going to send it the part of this template name that comes after the hyphen. Okay, so it sounds complicated to explain, but in practice it's very simple. I just put in here either S1 or S2. Okay, and then that will go and look for sidebar-s2.php and use that in the template, include that. So I refresh this here and I should see the sidebar 2 content now in this part here. Okay, so there's sidebar 2 heading in a different content. If I want to include sidebar 1, I simply just change this from S2 to S1. Refresh, okay, and there's the sidebar, the original sidebar's content. Now I could include both of these on a page if I want. Okay, S1 and S2, and they appear one after the other. Now, if I had two different sidebars, I would probably put them as a left and a right sidebar, but it will appear wherever you've told it to appear in the code and with your CSS styling. Okay, at the moment, they're two sidebars that are both styled to be on the right, and they've placed one under the other. Okay, so I can place any combination of different sidebars on include any combination of different sidebars in any other template that I want. Okay, so I'll change that back to just having the one sidebar output there. Okay, but that option is available to you. Okay, now, before I go on any further, there is one very important thing that I need to add to my header and my footer that's quite often overlooked and forgotten. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my header.php file and I'll refer to the documentation where it talks about this. So I've got a link here to a section about two different functions, WP head and WP footer. Okay, so the WP head function, actually it might be better off just to look at this header part here. Okay, so under this documentation about the header.php, okay, it says that I should add a call to this function WP_head before the closing head tag because plugins use this action hook to add their own script, style sheets, and other functionality. Okay, so what that means is when you install certain plugins, quite often they're going to need to inject their own code. So it might be a link to their own JavaScript files or their own CSS files into your page template. Okay, and in order to do that, it's either going to want to put it in the head section or in the footer section. So to give WordPress away, to give WordPress away or to tell WordPress whereabouts in your code that plugin should insert this stuff, we use the function WP head in the header and WP footer in the footer. Okay, and it simply just goes for the header. It should be the very last thing before the closing head tag in the head section of your HTML. Okay, so WP head should go in here. Okay, and it's head, not header. Okay, so it's important to remember that. So that needs to go there in your header.php file, and in your footer.php, just before the closing body tag, you need to put a call to the WP footer function like this. Now, often people forget to do this because it often doesn't make much of an immediate difference to how your page looks until you get around to installing a plugin and wonder why that plugin doesn't work with your theme. Okay, but you should always put it there for future proofing in the case where undoubtedly if you use any sort of plugins they will need that in there to work. Now the only difference that you'll probably see now when I refresh my page, if you notice my blog site, okay, if I log into my blog site here, like this, and then I come back and refresh the front end of my page, you'll notice that when I'm logged in, it has this administration bar up here, which provides me handy links, shortcut things like creating a new post or links to the dashboard, things like that. Okay, now I'm definitely logged into my example site, okay, because here I'm in the back end here, but that's not showing up here. So that's one example of what WordPress itself needs that WP head and the WP footer function to hook in to provide that functionality over your theme. So when I refresh this now that I've put those both in, if I've done it correctly, you should see that show up at the top now. Okay, and there it is. Okay, so that's only going to work if you've got that WP head and the WP footer functions in your template files. Okay, but other plugins are going to use those as well. So that's an important thing to remember when you're creating your header and your footer, but something that's often forgotten. Okay. Alright, so the last little part that I want to look at for today, actually it's kind of a big part, but we've gotten a lot, we've fixed a lot of stuff and we've gotten some dynamic content outputting, but obviously the most important content, which is our post content, is still just the static content in our template file. Okay, so what I want to do now is replace this with the actual content that's in WordPress. I want to replace it with the actual posts that are in here. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to come back across to my index.php file, and I'm going to delete my static content. So I've just got an empty, I've got an empty section here. In fact, I'm going to change this from an article to a section. Okay, for no other reason than it's semantically a bit nicer. Okay, because when I designed a static website, it was only meant to have, I mean, this only represented, if I can find it, this only represented one article there. Okay, so I created that whole thing as an article. In this case, I'm going to have multiple posts show, and I want each of them to be an article. So I'm going to have my main content now be a section, and each of my posts will appear within an article. Okay, and I'll give that a class of post. So basically what I want to happen is something like this. Okay, so if I had two posts, it would look something like this. Okay, so I want to output it like that. Now, my template can't, or I can't know beforehand how many posts I'm going to have to output here. Okay, so obviously I need to do this dynamically some way. And for that we use the WordPress Loop. Okay, so there's two links at the bottom of my blog post here, the loop and the loop in action. Okay, and both of those demonstrate the loop in various different ways, but I'm going to give you my own explanation, but just know that there's lots more information here that goes into more depth about it. Okay, and this part can seem complex, but it's not really that complex when you understand how it works. So what I'm going to do is get rid of, again, this static code so that I just have an empty section there for my main content, and I need to type in some PHP code here, which is the WordPress loop, and it's called the WordPress loop because it is actually a PHP loop construct. Okay, and it looks like this. So we looked at we looked at a couple of different loops. We looked at a for loop and a for each loop. This is again another loop which is very similar, called a while loop. Okay, and it's actually even simpler than the other loops that we looked at. And it looks like this: while some condition is true, keep doing whatever it is that you're going to do. So the condition that we want to test for is basically while there's still post to process. So we can check that by calling a WordPress function called havePosts. So while havePosts, keep processing the posts. Okay, and then we're going to have a end while. Okay, so here in between this while and end while is where we're going to output the post content. So again, just recapping back a couple of weeks, so this is the alternate looping syntax, and I'm using, instead of using the brackets like this, okay, and I'm only using this version, and it would work either way, but I'll use this version because that's a version that you'll see written in the WordPress documentation, just to see it consistent. Okay, but that's the start of our loop and that's the end of our loop, and whatever we do in between here is going to process the particular post that it's working on. In order to get the current post, we need to call another PHP function, okay, at each iteration through the loop, called the_post. Okay, now I can write that on 2 lines, but you'll probably see in the WordPress documentation this condensed to just 1 line. So you'll probably see this written like this. Okay, but that's essentially 2 lines of code. There's the while loop, and then that's the first line of code that's executed each time through the loop. So the post function within the loop calls a function which actually goes and grabs all the information about the current post out of the database. So I can actually store that information in a variable if I want. So I'll call it post, and I can access that by calling this function here, the post. Okay, and if I want, I can output that in some HTML by using the print _r function. So the print r function just outputs an object in a nicely readable way. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Oh, sorry, I think I wrote that the wrong way actually. Sorry, it should be get post. Okay, so this is what the post that's returned from the database looks like to PHP. Okay, and it's basically an associative array. Okay, it's a list of items which has a string index identifying what they are. Okay, so there's 2 post objects here. There's that first one, and then there's the second post that I added as well. Okay, and you can see that they're output in reverse chronological order because the hello world one is down here. Okay, and then there's my where is it? My second post content. My second post outputs here as the top one. Okay, but these are all the bits of information you can access about the post and output to your template if you want to use them. Okay, so again, you only need to output what you want. So normally the things that we want to output is the title and the content and maybe the link to the full post as well. Okay, so the way that we do that is by using a bunch, again, of WordPress functions. Okay, a bunch of WordPress template tags. Okay, so a lot of these template tags will be demonstrated in these information about the loop. Okay, and again, basically these template tags will take a consistent form again. See if I can find where they're demonstrated here. Okay, template tags. So there's a section here where a whole lot of template tags are listed, and they are listed by category. So the ones that you want to look at here are post tags. Okay, so things like the title here will output the title of the post, the content will output the content of the post, and various other things. But as you can see, any information you want to output about the post generally takes the form of a function that looks like the underscore and then whatever it is you want to output. So the title, for example. Okay, so in this very simplest case, if I just want to output the title of these posts, I can just write that call to the title there. And as you can see, it gives me exactly what I've told it to, which is outputting the title for each post with absolutely nothing in between. Okay, I haven't put any new lines in between, I haven't styled them in any particular way, it's just output them one after the other. So what I want to do is actually output this in between some HTML that's going to format this in the way that I want it to display. So for example, I want to output the title inside of a heading, and I want each post to be output inside of an article with a class of post, okay, so that I can style that later on. Okay, so there's my heading 2, and inside that now I'm going to output the title. So now there's my title of my 2 posts output as heading 2. So if I inspect this in my code view again, okay, there it is. There's my article with the class of post, there's my heading 2 with the post title, and then there's the article and heading 2 for the first post, the Hello World post. So now we just build upon this and output the other bits of information about the post that we want to look at. Okay, so for example, we can output the post content. So I might put this inside of a div with a class of post content, and then in a bit of PHP here which outputs the underscore content. Okay, and now I get the title output and the post content. Now, what I might want to do here is you've got a couple of options when you're listing posts one after the other like this. Sometimes, and I might just create another post just to illustrate a point. Okay, and I'll make this post kind of big-ish. Okay, so that's quite a long post. Let's add also a picture to this. I'll just use let's just use this screenshot. Okay, I'll insert that into the post, publish that. Okay, and now that should output there as quite a long post. Okay, so if I have really long posts like this, okay, then maybe I don't want to output the entire content of the post when I'm listing all of my posts one after the other. So what I can do is instead of that I can output a excerpt of the post. So I might come down here and instead of outputting the content I can output the excerpt, like so. Alright, and notice what that does now if I refresh the page. So what the excerpt does is it will limit what's output in the post content to the first certain number of words. I don't know exactly how many it is, okay, but you can see it shortened the content there. Now these other posts aren't long enough to be shortened, okay, but the ones that are will get shortened to that content, and it's obviously not outputting that image. Now, So that's the default thing, but you can also control what's output as an excerpt in WordPress itself. So if I come back to this post and I click on the screen options here and tell it to show me the excerpt field, I can actually come down here and type in something different so I can control exactly what's output for the excerpt of this post. Okay, so I'll just type in here an excerpt for the third post. Then I'll update that. And now if I go back and refresh, what this actually does is it first of all checks if the excerpt checks if that post has an excerpt field in there, and if it does have that, it will use it, and if it doesn't, it will just shorten the content. Okay, so there you can see that's output the excerpt of the post there. Okay, now we can add other things to this, like for example, I could copy this example here from documentation, which outputs the... Okay, so this example, this code here, again, is just calling more WordPress template tags, in this case outputting the time that the post was made. Okay, so these parameters will format that time in a certain way. In this case, it will output the date, and then also the author of the post as well, which will output the name of the user that was logged in when that post was created, and also a link to all of that user's post as well. So we're going to put that in there. Okay, and there you can see that's output there, the date, and then the username there that the post was created by. Okay, and you can output any of that. As I said, there's lots of information that's stored about the post. Okay, and you can output pretty much any of that information, as much or as little as you want to use for that. Now, one last thing I might want to add to this is you can see I've only got, for this one now, I've only got the excerpt of the post output. So I really want to be able to click on this and then load up the full content of that post. So what I can do is around the title here, okay, I could wrap this within an A tag. And the href of this A tag, I'm going to, again, generate using a WordPress function. Okay, so I don't have to worry about managing URLs. I can just put in here a bit of PHP, and I'll output the underscore permalink. Okay, so that will output a URL to the single version of that post. Okay, the single listing of that post content. So if I refresh that now, you can see all of these become links. Okay, and if I click on them, it loads just that single post content. Okay, now as you can see, this hasn't really solved my problem because it's still just outputting the post content. And the reason for that is, okay, again, referring back to that template hierarchy, just load it up again. Okay, because I only have an index.php file in my theme, it doesn't matter what type of content I'm looking at, it's all being output using my index.php file. And my index.php file is still just outputting the excerpt of the post content. Now I can look in here and I can see that if I want to look at a single post, then I can use a template called single.php. Okay, and if that exists, it will use that to output the single post content instead of my index.php file. So if I actually want to view the full content of my single post differently to what my index page is outputting, then what I can do is make a copy of this index.php file, and rename it single.php. And now when I'm viewing a single post, it will use this single.php file instead of the index.php file. And all I'm going to change is, instead of outputting the excerpt for the single post view, output the full content. Okay, again, making sure that that's all uploaded to my remote server. So there's my single.php file. Now my home page, okay, is, sorry, what have I done here? I modified the wrong file, sorry. I changed the index.php file and I should have changed the single.php file. Okay, so now the single.php file outputs the full content and the index.php file outputs just the excerpt. So I'll go back here now. My index page, as you can see, is still outputting the excerpt, but as soon as I click on one of these, it's going to now use the single.php template file and output the full content of the post. Okay, on these other two, it's not obvious the difference because the excerpt is, the full content is small enough to fit within the excerpt. Okay, but in this long post, okay, you can see that there is a difference. So that's now we've started branching out into different templates for different types of content in our WordPress. And in the coming weeks, that's what we're going to look at expanding upon, actually creating more templates for different sections. So we might have a different template for a category, we might have a different template for different pages that we might have, or different tags, or any other various situations that we might have. Now there is one last thing that I do want to show you, and that is something that you'll probably see in the documentation for the loop. You'll notice in the documentation of the loop that they actually have the entire loop here actually surrounded within a conditional if statement. And I'll show you the reason for that. In order to demonstrate that, what I'm going to need to do is actually unpublish all of these posts. So I'm going to change all of these posts that I have to drafts. Okay, so when I have a draft, they're not output within a template. Okay, so it's effectively the same as I've just deleted those 3 posts. Now I'll come back to my index page now, and you'll notice that it doesn't show anything. So normally what's a good idea to do is actually test if there's posts available, and if there's not, we should output a message saying that there's no posts. Okay, otherwise this might be interpreted as an error, that it's just actually failed to load. So what we can do is wrap our entire WordPress loop in a if statement which says if have posts, then go ahead and do the loop. Okay, else we can output something, just maybe a paragraph that says, sorry, there aren't any posts to show, or something like that. And then I'll have an end if here. Okay, so now I have a big conditional statement which, if there are posts, it will do the normal loop. Otherwise, it will output this message here, sorry, there aren't any posts to show. So let's see if that has worked. Okay, so now in the case where there aren't any published posts to show, it actually outputs something so the user can see that there's actually no content to show there. If I go and publish just one of these posts, okay, then there will be posts, okay, so it will show all the posts that are available that are published. Okay, and as I publish more of these, it will show more of them in that loop. Okay, so refresh that. Alright, and there are my 3 posts back again. Okay, so that's just a little extra failsafe to deliver the user a nice message letting them know if there aren't actually any posts to show. Okay, so I think that's a good place to stop today. So just to recap, we went through installing WordPress on a remote web server, and we started to look at taking a static mock-up for a site and turning that into a WordPress theme.